Zoom this morning. It's actually morning. out in California on spring break with my family. I guess where to begin? I've had a career now making myself feel quite old. It's dating 30 years and spent all of that time focused on being a housing equity analyst. For those of you that are not familiar with that, basically we analyze companies, publicly traded companies that are in the housing sector, whether they're home builders, building product manufacturers, mortgage related, real estate services, really anything what we call in our ecosystem, the multifamily rental market. So it's really what we provide to our clients who are predominantly institutional investors that are managing money, insights to what's happening in our housing world. And we do a lot of thematic work as well as company coverage. So we rate companies buy, hold, and sell. And we also do a lot of proprietary survey work. So, the career that I've had has really been focused initially as a young analyst on ways to differentiate myself and add value to our institutional clients. And in 2005, during the housing boom, I was bearish, and I was at Credit Suisse at the time. I spent a decade there. Prior to Credit Suisse, I was at Zelman Brothers, which no longer is a standalone company, but some of you may know him from reading Liar's Poker about Zelman Brothers. But I think really the key to my success early on was being open to really being willing to ask questions and frankly asking for help. Even prior to getting the job at Zelman Brothers, going a bit around, I was really at a state university in Northern Virginia that didn't have Wall Street recruit there. So it was quite challenging just even to get your foot in the door. And so, when Melanie and I are talking about ways to really be proactive, I think in university, when you're studying and thinking about what you want to do in your career, the challenge is, there's so many different directions you can go in. So one of the things that I highly recommend is what I was doing early on is information interviews. And it may be that now it's just listening to podcasts. And I shared with Melanie a PDF that I put together to really help be sort of a navigation tool to help young people figure out how to go about pursuing a career in finance. Because just the word finance, I'll ask people, what are you interested in? And they'll say finance. And I'll say, really, which part of finance? And that's, dozens and dozens of different areas that fall under that umbrella. So my first suggestion is always to dig in and understand, what the different areas of finance are, and do so by either talking with people and asking them a lot of questions about what they're doing, or in fact, listening to podcasts. And I mentioned one in this, again, PDF that Melanie could share with all of you, that Barry Ritholtz on Bloomberg, who is with Bloomberg, does a weekly podcast called Masters in Business. So unlike myself, I didn't have access to podcasts, but you guys do, and you can listen to people talk about their careers, and not necessarily just in finance in a lot of different areas, but predominantly finance. And I think that would be really helpful for you. But for me, back in, dating back to 30 years, it was about asking, whether people I worked with. I was at Arthur Young, at the time, it was one of the big 8 accounting firms, and I was a secretary, and I was actually putting myself through night school, working and taking classes at night. And I would start asking the people that work there, do you, like what you're doing? What do you do? And as we continue to, explore the discussions and get deeper into it, they pushed me, knowing what I was interested in more. Well, you should go work on Wall Street. And so I didn't even know what Wall Street was. So then I had to find people that knew people that worked on Wall Street. And, I'd be at my gym. I worked part-time folding towels to pay for my gym membership. And anyone who'd come into the gym, I'd say, do you know anyone that works on Wall Street? And sure enough, one person did. And they would hook me up and ask, would you meet with my friend I know who's a young lady who's interested in a job? And just continuing to dig and explore. And while I really, really thought I wanted a job on Wall Street, and it was my dream come true to get a job at Zelman Brothers in investment banking, I was in a 2-year program that's a financial analyst program that still exists today. And the 2-year program is typically, really, really burn them out, work 80 to 100 hours a week, and then you go off and get your MBA. And while I worked there for 2 years, I realized very quickly this was not the career I wanted. And that was pretty deflating. And one of my messages to all of you is, your first job won't be your last. And while there's so much pressure on all of you to know what you want to do when you graduate high school, I would just say that just keep exploring and your path will take different directions. While my path might have stayed on one path once I went into equity research, I know many people that have gone to law school and then realized they didn't want to be a lawyer, and then they wind up being executives in different areas completely outside of law. So the pressure, while it's there, I would just say relax and try to enjoy your journey. But with myself, networking continued once I became an equity analyst. Really, that networking capability was really what differentiated myself, because I would ask a lot of companies that were privately held. My buddy or mentor that I was assigned at Salomon Brothers said, you really need to differentiate yourself by do what we call channel checking and talking to not public management teams, but private companies that can help you better understand and learn about the industry, but give you sort of straight shooters, so to speak, about what's going on in the business. So I started calling upon various private companies and cold calling them and asking if they would be interested in chatting with me. And really, as a student of the industry, if you get someone talking about themselves, they're all of a sudden they love you. They're like, well, that woman is so interesting, and you barely did anything other than ask them questions. And that enabled me to build a network of private companies that were giving me insights month to month, that I was jotting down on a piece of paper every month. How are your sales? What's happening with costs? What are you seeing broadly? Asking them questions, and then taking that information and aggregating it and then relaying it back to my clients. And the same thing with my clients. I always would ask my clients, tell me about yourself. What have you done? How did you get where you are in your current role? And getting them to talk about their personal lives. Are you, do you have children? Do you like to play sports? What do you do in your free time? Because I think in business, you really try to find some way to connect with people. And by having that personal connection, the business easily follows. I think when people, we're all human, we all have lives and families. And so, it might be as simple as, I lived overseas for a few years. Oh my goodness, so did I. And next thing you know, you're chatting about that, and it's a half an hour later and you didn't even talk anything about business. But when you're giving people information that they find is differentiated, they're really willing to come back and help you. So when I would talk to my clients, I'd say, I'm very young, starting out as, a new housing analyst. What do you think I should be focused on? What are the things that you think the street, meeting my other analysts at different firms, at Goldman Sachs and Bank of America, all the other big firms, what are they not doing that I should be doing? And by being inquisitive, really helped me to be a standout, because I was humble enough to know I didn't know much, as opposed to going into meetings and trying to, be in a position where I was giving all the information. I was really more gathering information. And I think that's really something that has continued throughout my career. Today, Zelman Associates, after being bearish in 2005 and really sticking to my guns based on a lot of the work that we were doing with data aggregation and just looking at what was happening with the lack of affordability, it was also a lot of the private companies that were telling me that this was crazy and it wasn't sustainable, and we're selling to investors, and talking to mortgage companies that were telling me I'm lending money to people that don't have jobs. And I'm like, how are you doing that? Oh, it doesn't, Fannie and Freddie buy those loans. It's okay. So sticking to my guns and being negative and believing in the work that I did enabled me to start my own firm. And I took the entrepreneurial leap in 2007. And I really had, fortunately, at that time, my husband, who helped me start the business, and the associate, one of them worked with me at Credit Suisse. And starting your own firm, you think, oh, it's not going to be really any different. I just go out and hang my own shingle. And I circled clients and asked them, would you come with me quietly if I went to, start my own firm? And, I got enough people that I felt confident that I could go ahead on my own. And worst case was, doesn't work out, I'll go get another job. And at the time, it just felt really easy because I would be doing exactly the same thing, but on my own. But in fact, it was a lot harder than I thought. I also had, at the time, I think a 3, 5, and 7-year-old. or maybe even younger. I'd have to go back. Let me think. 7. My oldest was 7. She was born in 2000. That's an easy one. So just go backwards. So here I am, a mother of 3 with quite a lot on my plate. But I think, when I look back in hindsight, it was a lot of fun and I was passionate about it. So as I continue to grow into this new platform that we built, the networking aspect never really stopped, and just continuing to build now our what we call our network. We have today about 1,000 companies that are private, predominantly 95% private, that are filling out a survey, whether it be within the home building section or the realtor section or the rental section, all the various silos, mortgage section, and they're doing it from an automated platform. And that allows us to aggregate data monthly that we then, again, publish and provide to our institutional investors. But one of the interesting things, I hire a lot of young people that come out of undergrad, and we call them greenfield. So we can mold them and teach them the way we want them. And a lot of times, even though we're gathering now, as opposed to me writing on a piece of paper and pencil, back in the day, taking notes and then just regurgitating to clients, we do have them filling out, it's something like a Survey Monkey, but it's, again, we built it. And so I'll tell the young professionals, you still want to get on the phone and call, several of your contacts. So when you're on the phone with them, you can really dig in further beyond what the 25 questions we might ask monthly. So when I'm listening to young people on the phone, sometimes I'll jump on with them and I'll let them lead the call. And let's say we're calling XYZ company, and one of my young guys will say, hi, hey, it's Justin, just calling to say, how's business? And I was like, whoa, first of all, ask him if it's a good time to chat, and ask him how his weekend was and what's happening. Did he go anywhere? Did you do anything fun? Always start again with the personal. And that's something that people need to learn, believe it or not. It's not as simple as it may sound. I do a lot of speaking events for, I try to pay it forward for young people that are interested in finance. I speak at universities, a lot of them within the finance clubs or investment groups. And one of the things that's interesting is just chatting with them is how many of them, whether they're doing internships or they're interviewing, are afraid to speak up and ask questions. And I would just say that be proactive, ask people for help, and always, again, focusing on where you can find a connection and what in fact would be a personal part of yourself that you can share with them. But one of the young ladies at my alma mater, George Mason, that I met a few years ago, pre-COVID, actually was physically at a dinner with several young ladies, and she was at an internship / part-time job. And so I said, have you asked people if they like their jobs? Have you talked to them about what they're doing? She says, oh, I don't want to bother anybody. And I was like, bother them. I mean, they like to talk about themselves. Don't be afraid to dig in. And any young people at new jobs, they'll say, oh, it's so awkward. I feel, it's like, I don't want to bother people. And I just say that it's not a bother. People enjoy it and they want to help you, for those that are willing to ask for help. And any young people that email me that want to learn more about what we do in equity research, I respond to every one of them. And a lot of times I'll get calls from executives that are in our network, let's say a private home builder in Naples that has been one of our industry contacts forever. And I'll say, my son just graduated, he's looking for a job in finance. Would you be willing to talk with him about a possible job? I said, sure, tell him to call me. So he reaches out and we start chatting, and he doesn't know anything about my firm other than I'm something to do with housing because his dad told me. So I kind of ripped him a new one and explained to him that you need to do your homework. You need to understand the company that you're calling. You need to know a lot about them. And there's a lot of information, fortunately for you guys, on the internet. Back in my day, I went to the library and there was, catalog cards, which you guys have no idea probably what that means. And you'd look up, something like an annual report and you'd go read it. In fact, I remember being embarrassed because my friend's friend at the gym that worked at Merrill Lynch, when I went in for my information interview, I was very proud to say that I had an interview at Zelman Brothers later that afternoon. And he said to me, really, tell me about Zelman Brothers. And I had read the annual report, so I was prepared. And I said, well, John Gutfriend, and he right away he said, John Goodfriend. And he corrected me in the pronunciation and went on to give me a rant about Salomon Brothers versus Merrill Lynch, and just gave me a download of everything that, was important to know, that really prepared me for my interview at Salomon. So I sounded like I really knew what I was talking about. And the one funny part was at the end of my interview with this man at Merrill Lynch, he said, did you see in the Wall Street Journal if Salomon Brothers did a deal today? Because back in the day, the Wall Street Journal used to have what's called tombstones. And the tombstones would show if there was any type of capital raise, whether it was an IPO or a debt deal. And it said that Salomon Brothers did a $200 million senior note offering for UPS. So at the end of my real official interview, I said to the gentleman I was meeting with, oh, by the way, congratulations on your UPS deal that you guys did today. And he was like, that was my deal. And he was so impressed that I knew that. So it was like one of those things that had I not had that interview, I was fortunate enough to have gathered that information and then regurgitated it. But I think that generally speaking, what would be really helpful for all of you is be prepared for who you're speaking with as much as you can, because you have access to the internet. The other thing is a lot of people are not prepared to really understand not only what Zelman does, but what an equity analyst does. And if they don't know anything about financial ratios, for example, there are things that they can do, whether it's read books like Peter Lynch's book, One Up on Wall Street is a good one. And there's a bunch of books that I gave to Melanie that we recommend that you read, really to give yourself an edge. We have a job posting on LinkedIn for an entry-level college graduate job. We can get 800 resumes in 2 days. And when we get that many resumes, we're overwhelmed with that resumes. We stop it, we pull it off LinkedIn. But then when we're going through the resumes, what we're looking for is not the person's name at the top. We don't even look at their name. The first thing we'll look for is GPA, what they did during their summers, what their interests are. Are they proficient in Excel? That's like number one. If you're interested in finance, you have to know Excel. PowerPoint's also helpful. To speak more than one language. And then we start to, narrow down the resumes that we're looking at. But I think a lot of what we look for is not only people that have passion, but they've done their homework and they're humble and they have very high level integrity. So if they don't know the answer, they say, I don't know, as opposed to trying to BS their way through a response. And I can smell BS so quickly. And a lot of the questions I'll ask young people, if assumingly they're interested, are, tell me why you like a stock that you might own and tell me about the stock. And they'll say, that I won my stock picking club in school and, I was doing this and that. And right away, I'll see that they don't know anything about the stock. They're trying to give me an answer where they might just say, I really don't know much about it. I didn't do my homework. That person might move on to the next level because they were honest and they were straightforward about their experience. So it's really important to always say, you don't know. And you know what, I'm gonna learn more and I'm gonna go dig in and I'm gonna come back with you. So I was at the University of Miami where my daughter is a sophomore. Now she was a freshman at the time. And they asked me to present to the investment club. And there was probably 30 kids, maybe 40 kids. And, it was like, one of them said, what motivated you? And I said, honestly, I wanted to make a lot of money. That was my key motivation. And I think that, in hindsight, when I look back on, my trajectory, my path, it was a lot more about, just being an expert in my field. I wanted to be an expert, which fortunately money came along with it. But I remember that this young man asked to speak to me after the event, came up to me and said, I'd love to talk to you more about, a career at Zelman. So I said, sure, call me. And he did. And I spoke with him. And he's now, at that time, I think he was a sophomore at the university. And he knew zero about finance. And within 5 minutes, I could tell that. So I gave him quite a lot of homework assignments and figured I'd never hear from him again, because that's usually the case. And in fact, he came back maybe a year later and I was surprised. I got an email and he had done a lot of the things that I had suggested that he did. So I was happy to then help him further. So I think that the lesson and the message is do your homework, don't be afraid to ask for help, and definitely be inquisitive and ask people questions about their careers, and they will be willing to share with you not only their successes and what they like and they don't like, but you'll come away with a better understanding. You know what? I don't want to do that. That sounds very unappealing to me. I think that I'm going to keep looking. The more you do while you're in school, whether it's high school and college, the more you get to narrow down to maybe where you want to focus. My son, who's a freshman at Rice University, he's been growing up with two parents in finance and knows probably more about the stock market and, the terminology and things that we've been sharing with him at, dinner time conversation. He doesn't know what he wants to do. So he's taking chemistry, philosophy, psychology. He's all over the place, and, he speaks fluent French. And so we just keep telling him, just keep taking classes, and eventually, talk to people and think about, but mom, I have to know for my summer what I want to do. And there's just so much pressure. And we're kind of like, that pressure is not coming from us. The pressure is coming from either himself or from the school. But at the end of the day, if you have the tenacity and the ambition and the passion, you're going to get there. But the more stress you put on yourselves, the more likely it's going to be difficult to get to a place where you can be comfortable with yourself. So you don't have to have all the answers when you're starting out in high school. What you need to do is ask a lot of questions and start narrowing it down. And then you try something like I did. And I realized, you know what, I hated it. So, at the end of my 2 years, everyone got their MBA. By the way, I tried to get an MBA or applied to 3 universities. I figured it, since I went to a state school that no one heard about until we went to the Final Four, the basketball championship, March Madness, for those watching. It was difficult to think that I could be successful unless I got an MBA at an Ivy League school. So I applied all 3. So at that point, I was like, well, I'm just going to get a job to pay my rent. So, things happen, you'll take turns in your life. And I think the reality is that we all recognize is that, whatever we think we may want today might change drastically, and just go with the flow and try to not to be too stressed out.